Fight Fans Radio.
What is up, everybody? This is a special edition of BJJ Addict Radio. When you're listening to this, it will be the holiday season, so happy holidays to everyone. We're live with special guest Emily Kwok. So thank you, Emily, for calling into the show, talking with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Of course, anytime. I'd like to just start with people perhaps learning your name and where you started in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay. So that takes me back about 12 years or so. I actually started out in my hometown, which is Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada.
Yes, and, another Canadian, finally.
Oh, are you Canadian too?
Absolutely, Ottawa.
Oh, woo woo! Yeah, it's back in the day when I started jiu-jitsu, it sort of was by chance. I had tried to box initially, and that hadn't really worked out so well for me. I had two left feet, was not very coordinated, couldn't seem to get my timing right, and a friend introduced me to jiu-jitsu. So at the time, it was in a small community center in Cole Harbour, so downtown Vancouver, and it was a small program. And I started under a blue belt there, John Teflonitis, and it just seemed like an interesting sport, something different. I went to the gym 4 or 5 days a week and was kind of bored with my workouts and wasn't really getting the gains that I wanted. So when I started jiu-jitsu, it seemed like something different. It was, physical. It was helping me achieve some of the fitness goals that I had, and that was the beginning of the end.
Nice. 12 years ago, the scene not even close to where it is today. What are some key differences that you noticed so far?
It's interesting. When I started jiu-jitsu in Vancouver, you were probably getting your instruction from blue belts or purple belts at most, and it was sort of, although I didn't really realize it at the time, I think it was very underground, there was one or two jiu-jitsu programs. Jeet Kune Do was really popular, there was a little bit of boxing, Muay Thai, but ground wrestling was still a little bit new. And, at the time, I think there was like Marcus Suarez in Vancouver, who was a really big name, still very big name in Canada and around the world. I believe he's a 6th or 7th degree black belt under Carlson.
Yeah, he's phenomenal.
And, he had his style of jiu-jitsu, and then there was, a handful of other guys that were teaching, and the scene was a lot more organic, I feel. It was sort of like, oh, you do jiu-jitsu, and it was a little bit less political maybe in some ways, because a lot of cross-training, people sort of figuring out where the best place for them to train would be, if they could even find a place to train. And for myself in particular, I found it to be really cooperative. Growing up in Vancouver and having most of my starter experiences in jiu-jitsu there, I had really, really wonderful teammates. I had always groups of people that were willing to help me out, and I by no means started out wanting to be a competitor. It was just something that I was doing, but at the time I was still one of the only girls, which has always been the case. But I always had really, really great instructors and people that were willing to help me, because I showed up all the time. So I would go to class 4, 5, 6 days a week consistently. And one of my early instructors after John Teflonitis was Dennis Kang, which, in the world of Canadian MMA has gone on to do really, really well for himself. So he was always, in my corner backing me up as well. And
Dennis is a great human being, very nice person.
Yes, super, super awesome guy. I had the pleasure of being able to train with him for about a year and a half. And like I said, it seemed a little bit more organic. It was less, I can't say that I know for sure in Vancouver now, but I think at the time it was a little bit less sort of, this is my team, don't train with these other people. It was a little bit more like, oh, you train jiu-jitsu, come train with me, or, you guys want to get together. And it was fun. It was really fun. It was a hobby. People seemed to really enjoy it, and everybody just sort of collectively came together to share what they knew, because there wasn't that much instruction available depending on where you were.
Nice. So after this, Um, how did you become? Let's just make this clear. You are the first Canadian black belt female in Canada, correct, for BJJ?
Yes. Yes.
And the first world champion.
I think so. I'm not sure if there's any other competitive males or females that have won gold medals, but I guess in 2007, I think that's probably the first time.
I would assume
So
so.
yeah.
But with this being said, do you find it kind of ironic that you became more well known within the last year than you did when you accomplished these huge feats in the sport?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think part of that adjustment for me too was also, I would say, in 2007. I had just come back from living in Japan for a little while. I was living in Japan from 2004 to 2005, and I'd moved back to Vancouver for a bit. And the year that I decided to go to the World Championships the first time was also the first time that I won. And I had totally planned on going to Brazil that year, and it was a big venture for me. I had never had the balls, nor had I ever had the thought to go to any sort of official IBJJF tournament. I was used to competing in the local tournaments in and around Vancouver, when I lived in Japan, so whatever was sort of readily available to me. And the opportunity came to go to the Worlds, and I was like, sure, let's go. And I think you don't know what you don't know, right? And when I went to the Worlds, it was just totally eye-opening and amazing. But I think when you're not, I could be mistaken, but I feel like if you're not in the world of IBJJF competition, if you're not always sort of following up on who's competing and who's around you, sometimes it's sort of a world apart, and you don't know that much about what's going on with a lot of the professional athletes and the elite level competitors. So the year that I went, I mean, there was a handful of people that I knew from Vancouver that would come down and do the tournaments as well. But I think locally and maybe in other communities around Canada, there's so many other different types of events that are going on that don't necessarily put the spotlight on something like the World Championships. I mean, I think maybe as a blue or a purple belt, unless your instructor is like really involved in the IBJJF, you don't really have that awareness built up yet. And I think what sort of made my name a little bit more recognized was, doing some DVDs with Stefan Kesting, and also I did some instructionals initially with BJJ Weekly. So it seems like the greater community of jiu-jitsu that includes competitors and non-competitors is sort of what helped get my name a little bit known, because I think the competitive versus recreational communities are sometimes very different, and we're not always that aware of each other. And I think that those two things coming together has really helped me get out there.
That's very well put. I was actually going to bring that up, actually, about the competitors and the people who just train as recreational. Do you find that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the sport, people don't really learn the roots or necessarily even could name that many competitors, whereas anyone else who does a certain sport could obviously list off a handful of people, their favorite baseball team. They can name up the coaches, the starting roster. Do you find Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu kind of lacks that for the students?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's interesting in how within jiu-jitsu there's there's the entire jiu-jitsu community, and then there's so many sub-communities. And I think depending on who you're influenced by, it has a huge impact on what you know and what you're involved in, And until I had instructors that were really into Pan Am's, World Championships, I didn't really pay that much attention. And, there was a time where I was working a little bit with Gracie Magazine, and my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, he knew all of the jiu-jitsu superstars. And there was a year that I went to go work a table at the Pan Am's, and one after another, Janji and Kron Gracie and Kira Gracie, all these people were coming up to the table, and I was helping them however I could help them, but my husband, as soon as they'd walk away from the table, would be like, do you know who that is? Do you know who that is? And for myself, I would be like, no, I don't. I was just going to help them get whatever they needed. And he'd be like, you need to study this, and you need to know who all these people are because they're like the most famous people in jiu-jitsu. And it was interesting to me because I just spend most of my time training, sort of with my head in the sand, and until somebody had really opened the doors for me and said, like, look at all of this that you're missing out on, I hadn't even known that side of the jiu-jitsu world existed. So, with my students now and with people that I work with, I think it's really important for us as, senior belts or as our, for our peers and as instructors to spread the word and make sure that your students and that the people that you train with do know about important people that have influenced you, because that is how your legacy is carried out, and there's so many legendary competitors that have paved the way for all of us that I think sometimes don't get the recognition that they deserve because they get drowned out by so much else that's going on. And I think that that's sort of your job if you stay in the sport, to make sure people know, because it's important, and it's the history of jiu-jitsu, where the sport's going, where it's come from, all of that is detailed in these awesome people that have come up along the way.
Nice. You know what? That's a totally different angle that I wasn't expecting to hear, that it's up to the instructors. That's a very cool way of putting it. I
think a lot of the times you're influenced.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry?
Oh, I thought you were speaking. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that a lot of the times I think with how we learn in today's culture and today's age, you have teachers, you have people that are responsible for feeding you bits and pieces of knowledge that hopefully you therefore, carry on with. And I think a lot of the times as instructors, your awareness of how much you affect your students, and even, just being a senior belt in the room, people really look up to you and they want to know what you have to say, and they're going to take what you say and, carry on with it another few steps. So, I think that it's your responsibility in some ways to sort of distribute the knowledge and share your perspective, because that's how the sport has come to where it is today. To what you're saying before, even 12 years ago, I think jiu-jitsu was a little bit more, in my eyes, a little bit more like self-defense based. And today, there's a whole angle of it that seems to have evolved into a complete sport, an aggressive, competitive sport. And that's changed too. But that's only because of all the different people that have been involved. They know where it comes from. Their instructors and their peers have always informed them, and they've sort of taken and carried the baton forward, and now it's turned into something else.
I was actually getting around to that. Do yourself teach? Do you still carry on with the self-defense part of it, or are you strictly sport-driven?
I am heavily sport-driven. That's how I was always trained. I learned more of the self-defense-based jiu-jitsu a little bit later on in my career. So again, that goes back to how my instructors were. So I did what my instructors told me to do, and at the time, for whatever reason, a lot of that the Gracie basic, that sort of self-defense, was not part of their curriculum. When I started to become more aware of it, it was probably at a blue or purple belt level. And when I think about including it in a curriculum now, I think it's really important, because there's a lot of things there, headlock escapes, how to do a basic hip toss. There's a lot of very fundamental skills that I think are really important for beginners to learn, and a lot of those skills carry forward even as your game advances. In addition to that, there's something to be said about the building blocks and the foundation and the history of the sport, and I think that we've been able to build the sport jiu-jitsu upon a lot of those basic principles. So for beginners, a lot of the really aggressive sport-based stuff is even a little bit intimidating, and I think the self-defense sort of puts it into a context that they understand. Everybody wants to learn a little bit of self-defense. I think that it's a really valuable part of a teaching curriculum to make sure that your students understand where all of the movements come from.
Yes, and being female, don't you find that, I think personally, it is much more important for a young female or females in general to learn some sort of self-defense, just because you're naturally not inclined growing up fighting or being rough and tough type of situations?
Yeah, I mean, I really think it's vital, actually. I think that every woman, every person for that matter, has self-awareness and understands how to use their body in the best and the worst of circumstances. And what I mean by that is a lot of the times you see women learn self-defense in a context of, a 1 or 2 day seminar on a weekend that's maybe 2 to 4 hours, and, it's some sort of like rape defense or attack defense sort of scenario. And although I think it's helpful to give women knowledge, what I don't think is helpful is giving false confidence. And I think that when you learn anything, whether it's how to, take pictures with a fancy camera or cook a meal, you usually need more practice than 2 or 3 hours. So when it comes to a woman or a young person understanding jiu-jitsu or giving it a try and learning some of these self-defense basics, I think it's really important because it's repetition and it's being, understanding how your body moves. It's getting your body to respond the way that you want it to. Like when we're in a position of fight or flight and somebody throws us to the ground or there's, something crazy going on, if you're not accustomed to being in that situation with someone on top of you, you're not going to know how to react the right way. And chances are you're not going to learn it in 2 or 3 hours. But somebody that's training multiple times a week and putting a lot of hours in, when they get thrown to the ground, it's then second nature to them to feel comfortable or to feel okay with someone bear hugging them. It's not as much of a shock to the system. So I really advocate, if a young woman starts getting involved in jiu-jitsu, a lot of it is to get rid of that fearful response, to condition yourself to know what it feels like to be held, to be pushed, to be, moved around with force. And most importantly, building self-awareness. And, a lot of people don't realize it's a skill you have to learn. Sometimes I'll be teaching and I'll tell people, please lift up your right hand. And in effect, they'll lift up their left hand or they'll move their foot by accident. And it's because a lot of the times so much of our culture is based on, verbal communication or like using the computer, and we're not necessarily connecting our minds with our bodies. So I think that's really important because if you're in a situation where you're being attacked and you're telling yourself, oh my gosh, I need to push this person away, but you haven't practiced that connection with your body, you might be bound to just sort of stand there and freeze because your body's not accustomed to reacting to you. So I think a lot of these lessons happen over time, and it's sort of the accumulation of putting the time in, the effort, learning, feeling comfortable with it. These are sort of the skills that I think you need to walk away with in order to feel more comfortable in a threatening situation.
Agreed. I was just wondering how the to beat a bigger and stronger opponent came about. I personally watched the DVDs. I really enjoyed it. I'm a smaller opponent, and I agree our game has to be quite different than a bigger person. So, first of all, I just want to tell you how much I really enjoyed the DVD. And second, I was just wondering how that did come about, and how was it doing such a great DVD?
Well, first of all, thank you. Thanks for keeping an open mind and supporting it. Stefan Testing actually was a very good friend of Dennis Kang's and a training partner of his. He's also a black belt under Marcus Suarez. And Stefan, I had the pleasure of being taught by him as a white belt time to time. And it's interesting because so many people from that small community in Vancouver have gone on to do other things and bigger things. And, Stefan at the time with Grapple Arts has now grown it into quite a monster. And he'd come to New York to do some work for MG in Action, where I work. And that's, of course, the website of my instructor, Marcelo Garcia. So when he was there, he had asked if I was interested in doing an interview because I was a fellow Canadian, and he said, we haven't really done a woman and we haven't done a lot of stuff in this regard, so would you be interested? And I said, sure, I'd totally be flattered. So we did an interview project, and out of that sort of confirmed this idea of, would you be interested in doing a DVD? And that, of course, was extremely, how shall I say, intimidating to me, because the world of instructionals and DVDs, the way I'd seen it, was always dominated by like super elite level competitors, generally men, and I was like, I don't know if I have any business saying anything. But we started putting an outline together, and the idea was to try, we talked about which sort of market we wanted to appeal to, because there isn't a lot of material out there for women. There's not always a lot of material out there for people who are also just like recreational practitioners. A lot of the elite level DVDs that come out are phenomenal. But, in order to be able to perform a lot of movements, you have to understand the principles. Sometimes you need to be a little bit more advanced. Like sometimes the moves aren't always easy to hit. And we thought maybe it would be nice to do a DVD that would be, conceptually based, teach a lot of these principles, and also help people that are always in a position of need. And the idea is everybody's always smaller than somebody, right? And, Marcelo Garcia and the whole idea behind jiu-jitsu is to be able to defend yourself against a larger opponent. And we decided not to sort of make it completely catered towards women, because I'd been told many times before from men, oh, well, I really enjoy your instruction. So that's sort of how the title and the project came about, and with the guidance of Stefan, because of course he's produced a lot of DVDs and instructionals himself, we, put this thing together. I went out to Vancouver and we shot it, and he did what he's, masterful at, which is, producing and editing everything and being a great partner, and that's how sort of the project came about. And it's funny because, like I said, I was always super intimidated and scared of what the reaction was going to be, and I was really happy to see that it had generally a really positive response. And a lot of people said, this is the first time that we've seen like a DVD by a woman, or I really like the clarity in the way that you teach, or nobody's explained this to me before, and I can't believe I was doing this wrong for so long. So I'm just, overall really pleased that the project was able to sort of bring about an alternative response to how we learn from each other, and also how we look at jiu-jitsu, that everybody can do it, and everybody can do fancy moves, everybody can do fundamental moves, but the important thing is how we learn those things and how we connect those movements together. So I really enjoy teaching. I really enjoy communicating all of these different types of ideas, and that's how we came about with the first project.
It's great, and my buddy, being the jerk he is, he's a big guy, and he also he bought these DVDs, and he's enjoying it because it's helping him deal with how to actually defeat a smaller opponent.
Yeah. I can imagine, and like it's funny because I think with jiu-jitsu, like sometimes my students will say, Emily, like I learned this, but you teach it this way, is it wrong? And I'm like, I guess I've learned in my time there's so many different ways that we approach the same movement, based on your body type, how you move, if you're athletic or are you a little bit more defensive. And what I appreciate about the response is that people have just kept a really open mind and looked at it in 20 different ways. And, like from the perspective of your friend, I think it's funny, but I also think it's awesome that they're able to take the concepts and apply them on their own, in a different way. So I want to sort of bring a different approach to learning and how we see jiu-jitsu that, and especially like Stefan's base, he caters to a lot of working professionals and, very intelligent people. And I think that sometimes in jiu-jitsu, we don't necessarily learn the important concepts or the principles. And those are sometimes the most important bits of information, because if you have 5 different people of different sizes and different body types, if you can teach them what the most important parts of the technique are, and you show them the movements, even if they can't do everything the exact same way that you did it, they understand what the point is and what they're supposed to be trying to do. So I think being able to explain things in that detail helps everybody learn and, enjoy the movements and actually execute them better.
I agree with you 100%. moving on a bit, UFC opening up a ladies division, of course, with Ronda Rousey being going to be the champ. Does this give you any incentive to get back into mixed martial arts, or are you completely done with that?
You know, that's a funny question. When I got into MMA, it was sort of this idea of I'll try anything once and ran with it. And when I started training MMA again in North America, because I'd done my sort of MMA bout in Japan and Korea, it was sort of pre-Gina Carano, right, and sort of I stopped training when Gina Carano really started to hit it big. And MMA, I have to say, is pretty awesome. It's, you know, everything and that you can imagine and more rolled into one. But it's incredibly intense to train on that level. And it's also equally, you know, in a different way, super challenging to train on an elite competitive level. And after doing it for 12 years, I found, you know, like I have a lot of injuries that I didn't realize I had and muscular imbalances. And, you know, training for MMA, I have to say, is also thrilling, but I don't necessarily say that it's fun because nobody likes getting punched in the face. And jiu-jitsu for me was always fun, you know, and even though it's very hard on your body and it's challenging, you could always have a good time doing it, at least in my eyes. I'm at the point in my life now where I'm 32. I would like to, you know, probably start a family, and I have a couple other things on the horizon that I would like to do, and competition is such a selfish thing, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that in order to compete on a high level, you really have to be able to devote all of your energy to it. You eat, you sleep, you breathe, you train, and that's it. You know, you really don't have that much room for other things in your life. And professionally, I've gone on to, you know, work in jiu-jitsu on a few different levels, in addition to wanting to set my sights on other things in life. So at this time, the idea of going back into the ring and, you know, getting my face punched is not that appealing for me, just because I know what that feeling is, and it's so powerful, but it's also so consuming. And I think the competitive nature is always in me, so it's not to say that I've totally, you know, put it on the back burner and won't go back to it. But right now I'm okay with where I'm at, and maybe in a few years, who knows, maybe I'll get the urge to want to get back in there. But it's, you know, when you're riding that hard for that long, taking a step back, it's like, wow, like your brain expands and you're like, I can't believe it took so much out of me, you know, and I don't regret it in any sense, but it's a lot of work. So I have a lot of respect for the women that are forging the way for MMA. I think it's great. But, you know, they're a little bit younger and they've got some gas in the tank, and they can give her.
Yeah, I hear you. Being punched in the face sucks.
Yes. Yes, it does.
You mind me asking why you chose to study under Marcelo Garcia, and what makes him such a special person? Like, you always hear it, but I guess maybe people don't understand until they hear it from somebody else, or like that trains with him, or of course, obviously, if you get to train with him.
Yeah. So it's funny because, you know, like I think when I started jiu-jitsu as a white belt in Vancouver, and through the various belt levels, you know, coming up as my awareness grew about who was in the sport of jiu-jitsu, it would make you wonder, oh, wow, it'd be so cool if I could train with them one day, or, you know, going to various seminars, you're affected by the abilities of these people. It so deeply affects you because you're like, this is amazing. I can't believe they know how to do this so well, or how do they move me so quickly? And Marcelo and his wife moved to the New York area sort of like mid to late 2000, I guess like 6 or so. And the first encounter I had with them was at the airport. I was actually flying, I think I was flying to or flying back from the World Championships. And his wife, Tatiana, had reached out to me in line, and she goes, oh, hey, I saw you fight at the Abu Dhabi trials, and you were really good. You should come train with us. And I, left it at that, and I was like, oh, thanks a lot. And again, my husband was like, oh my God, do you know who that was? And do you know who was standing behind her? And, he was really sort of like, oh, you got to go train with Marcelo. But I think anyone who trains, especially on a competitive level, they understand that, when you're part of a team, it can be a difficult thing, for better or for worse, to think about leaving that team or not being a part of that team. And at the time, I was at Ricardo Almeida's, and, it was, in my brain, the best decision to stay at Ricardo's. But I think throughout everybody's careers, depending on what stages they get themselves through, sometimes the best thing to do is to sometimes have to forge your own path or, to grow in a different way. And the time came for me where I felt that I needed something a little bit different. And when I started training with Marcelo, again, it was sort of, I kind of put my toes in the water and was like, oh, is this place really going to work out for me? And I had a really excellent experience the first time that I went there. And part of what made the decision for me was not just the fact that Marcelo was a phenomenal, revolutionary athlete in his own way, but what I appreciated about his school at the time was that I felt like the energy there was purely about jiu-jitsu. It was purely about training. It was purely about learning and having a community around something that we all love to do so much. And that, of course, is created by his love of the sport and his abilities and what he's accomplished. But the group of people that were there really touched me. And his wife, in effect, Tatiana is a wonderful person, and I think she's had contributed so much to his success as well, because she really helped create that environment. And when I decided to make the switch, it was a really scary thing for me, because you don't want to be sort of outcast or be fearful or feel bad about the team that you're leaving. But I learned a really important lesson at that time, which is that you're the best person that knows what's best for you. And the most you can hope for is for things to be amicable and for things, for people to be mature about it and for us to all grow and do well in the future, And learning from Marcelo has been really interesting because he has had the ability to, over his career, hone in and focus so much on one aspect of life, which is learning this amazing sport and helping it move forward. He's evolved the game in so many ways. And, one of the biggest things that impacted me about his game was how efficient it was, and that I'd never seen movement like that before. My training had been a mishmash. I never moved to train with a particular team. I never sort of like left teams by choice. But I was young. I moved from Vancouver. I moved to Tokyo, New York, New Jersey. So I trained with what was available around me, and I thankfully had really great instructors most of the time. But when I trained with Marcelo, I went from learning sort of, I would say like from the canon of jiu-jitsu, from learning a little bit of guard work, a little bit of, top work, passing the guard, I learned all the basic stuff. But what I learned with Marcelo was a highly stylized game. And where I had been a little bit more of a defensive competitor, Marcelo pushed me to be more offensive because his game is extremely aggressive, offensive, and sport-based. So I felt that his game was streamlined for this purpose, and that's what everybody knew him for having a very exciting and dynamic style. And for the spirit of it, I mean, he really fought. I think when Marcelo fights, he fights to win, and he fights to showcase jiu-jitsu at its best, like what he can bring to it. And this, of course, is just my opinion. But, I think some other times in competition, what you see is people that fight to not lose. And, it ends up sort of stalling the game out or bringing it down. And I really admire that quality about Marcelo's game. And it's something that I felt I was lacking in, and I wanted to encourage and develop more in myself. So learning from Marcelo has been, in some ways, fighting myself because it's been everything opposite of what I do. You know, I was always a lot more passive. I didn't just go for things. I wasn't that quick. I was sometimes a little bit more apprehensive. And he's through his movement, I've had to learn and pick up all of these details. And I always tell people training with Marcelo is like being on the ride that you're just not tall enough to be on yet. Like, I mean, it's crazy. And to train and move with someone who understands the balance in a human body so greatly, like it's like he'll push the left side of your knee and you'll go flying to the right side and you'll wonder how it happened. I mean, he just has such a complete understanding, of course it's still evolving, of how to offset balance, how to move his partners, how to get them to do what he wants. It's phenomenal, you know. But to that effect, it's somebody who's also in such a unique and specialized position that he's able to do that. So for myself, I am not someone who is as physical as Marcelo. I'm much more in my head sometimes, and it's challenging for me to move the same way. So I really thought that training with him would help me develop that. And I think it has. I mean, nowhere to the degree that he has and what he's been able to dedicate to his craft. But for all of us that have the fortune of being able to train with him, I think it's a blessing to bring that to your own game. So I've certainly appreciated the knowledge that I've been able to gain from him.
That's amazing. Now, as a teacher, has this changed your methods of what you show your own students?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I think that his game is highly stylized. You know, there's certain things that he won't do because he doesn't believe it will work on everyone. You know, so for example, like a Kimura grip, it's not part of his personal curriculum because he believes that there's better submissions to go for. So it's made me as an instructor question what I think will work and not work. I've certainly adopted some of his principles, and I've had to, you know, be proven wrong sometimes, you know, and also with his movement, as I said before, I find that his game is so efficient. It's like I tell people, if you learn to sweep in 5 movements, he might teach it to you in 2 or 3. And it's like trimming the fat off of a piece of meat. Like it's pretty amazing. So there's definitely some movements that I've learned from him that are just worlds apart from how I may have originally learned the movement, because the original movement works. There's nothing wrong with it. But especially when you put it into a sport-based context, if you can hit it a little bit faster, a little bit smoother, you're going to get the move, you know. So I have sort of adopted a lot of his principles and his movements because for sport-based methods, it works, you know, and it works faster, it works better. But that's not to say that I neglect or forget about anything else that I've learned, because there's relevance with all of it. I just think it's a matter of, like, when I teach, it's a matter of what am I teaching, who am I teaching to, you know, and what is the purpose for me teaching? Am I teaching, you know, the basics, the foundation, or am I teaching a group of students that are really interested in competition? So it's just a little bit of weeding and altering the curriculum in that sense.
Nice. I was going to ask you about if people want to learn from you specifically, where can they get a hold of you, and how can they find out how to train with you? Do you have any seminars coming up, etc.? Sure.
Well, I have a school in Princeton with my business partner, Arthur Kynes. He's a black belt as well. So we have a school in Princeton. The website is princetonbjj.com. I also do, you know, public speaking workshops and seminars and all that kind of good business. You can either reach me through princetonbjj.com, or you can also go to emilykwok.com, and that's EMILYKWOK. So that is, if you want to sort of reach me on for independent projects. You know, I've lately started wanting to branch out a little bit more into bringing some of the lessons that I learned through jiu-jitsu into more of a mainstream. So I've been working with a lot of high school groups and youth groups. The other aspect of it is I run a series of women's grappling camps with Valerie Worthington and Lola Newsome. And for that, they can go to Groundswell Grappling, or you could look up Women's Women's Grappling on Facebook. And we lead a series of women's grappling camps around the country, and sometimes we bring in guest instructors. We just recently had Michelle Nicolini and Annette Stack in Virginia. And the purpose of this camp is not necessarily to just learn jiu-jitsu, which is, why we're all there, but we also bring about a more cohesive experience. We talk a lot about what happens in jiu-jitsu, challenges you may be facing, maybe questions you have on competition or people's careers. So a lot of this is trying to develop the person inside of jiu-jitsu. So those are sort of 3 different outlets that you can reach me. And, of course, there's a DVD series if you can't get to me with Stefan. We have a second one that's going to be coming out. It's on pre-sale now. You can go to my website or you can go to Stefan's website as well. And as for seminars, you can hook up onto my Facebook page if things are put up there. Seminars are sort of set up based on where there's a need or a demand. So I've been to Canada a few times last year. I went to Puerto Rico this year. So, wherever there's a demand or an interest is sort of where I'll go.
Nice. Well, that's amazing. And any last words you would like to say to the listeners at home right now?
That's sort of a big question.
I know.
I think that we're all doing jiu-jitsu for different reasons, and no matter what your reasoning is or how long you've been training, it's important to have respect for all of it, and I think in the last few years I've sort of seen a bit more of a difference in the different types of communities, like I was saying before, of what exists within jiu-jitsu, and I think it's fascinating, and I think we can all learn from each other. So I think as the sport matures in North America and you have more and more black belts coming about, there's so many different teaching styles and cool things that are being shared, and I encourage everyone to keep an open mind because, you might learn things from the unlikeliest places. And I always tell people you can learn something from even a beginner, and having a respect for different perspectives and learning from each other, I think, is the key to making the sport be the best that it can be. So, always have an open heart with it.
Well put. I think that's a great thing to keep in mind. I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to speak with myself and obviously BJJ Radio, Fight Fans Radio. It's been a pleasure. A huge fan. I really enjoy your take on jiu-jitsu.
Thank you. I enjoy connecting with people that have it, and like I said, it's because of shows like this that I have the opportunity to put a different perspective out there. So I appreciate you guys giving a voice to everyone that's involved in the community. It means a lot, and I think because of this, it'll connect other people that feel the same way.
Agree. Enjoy the rest of your day. We got some time left before the crappy old week starts, but I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Thanks so much, David.
No problem. Thank you, Emily.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, guys. Thank you for listening to BJJ Radio. This is a special holiday edition, and stay tuned. We continuing to put stuff out, and we're getting ready for 2013. Hang tight, everybody.